The first days of America were not what you expect. When people think about the beginning of America, they imagine something strong and certain, a group of determined leaders building a new nation with confidence and purpose. But the reality was far more uncertain and far more fragile. In 1776, when independence was declared, America was not a powerful country. It was just a collection of 13 colonies trying to hold themselves together, with no strong central government, no stable economy, and no guarantee that any of it would survive. The idea of America existed, but the country itself was barely holding on, and the people living through it could feel that uncertainty every single day, where survival mattered more than any vision of the future. Nothing felt permanent, nothing felt secure, and even the idea of independence itself felt like a risk that could collapse at any moment. The war had already begun, and the British Empire was one of the most powerful forces in the world, disciplined, experienced, and confident in its strength, while on the American side, the army was weak, underpaid, and poorly supplied. The soldiers of the Continental Army did not look like the heroic figures people imagine today. Many of them lacked proper clothing. Some did not even have shoes, and during the winter, they were forced to walk barefoot through the snow, leaving behind trails of blood as they moved forward, a silent reminder of how much they were sacrificing just to keep going. Hunger was constant, the cold was relentless, and each day pushed them closer to their limits, not just physically, but mentally, where hope itself began to fade. Many soldiers deserted, not because they didn't believe in the cause, but because staying alive became more important than anything else, and in those moments, survival was the only thing that made sense. This was not a perfectly united or unstoppable force, it was a desperate one, held together by determination more than strength. Even the leadership was not as secure as history often makes it seem. Figures like George Washington carried an enormous weight on their shoulders, knowing that a single mistake could destroy everything they were trying to build. He was leading an army that could collapse at any moment, while facing an enemy far stronger and better equipped, and every decision he made came with consequences that could not be undone. There were moments of doubt, moments of fear, and moments where the future seemed impossible to predict. Inside the Continental Congress, there was no perfect unity. There were arguments, disagreements, and deep uncertainty about whether independence was even the right decision. Some believed it would lead to freedom, while others feared it would lead to chaos. And for a long time, those fears felt completely justified, because nothing about the situation felt stable or guaranteed. Within the colonies themselves, the situation was even more complicated, because not everyone supported independence. The population was divided between those who wanted freedom and those who remained loyal to Britain. And this division ran deep, breaking apart families, friendships, and entire communities. People who once trusted each other began to question one another, and suspicion slowly became a part of everyday life. This was not just a war against an empire, it was also an internal conflict that forced people to choose sides, often at great personal cost. And once those choices were made, there was no easy way back. Ordinary people suffered the most. Farmers feared losing their land, merchants watched their businesses collapse, and cities were filled with tension and uncertainty, where even small decisions carried heavy consequences. Stability did not exist, only the constant pressure of not knowing what would happen next. And that uncertainty shaped every part of daily life. The effects of the war were not limited to battlefields. They reached into homes, streets, and daily routines. Towns were damaged, supplies became scarce, and prices rose beyond what many people could afford, forcing families to make difficult choices just to survive. For many, independence did not feel like freedom. It felt like loss, the loss of security, the loss of stability, and the fear of an unknown future that no one could clearly see. Even when victories were achieved, they did not bring immediate relief, because winning a battle was not the same as winning a war, and even winning the war did not guarantee the survival of a nation that was still fragile and uncertain. But what makes this story even more unexpected is how close everything came to complete collapse. There were moments when the American cause did not just look weak, it looked finished. When defeat did not feel like a possibility, but like an outcome that was almost certain. One of the most critical moments came during the brutal winter at Valley Forge, where the Army faced conditions so harsh that survival itself became uncertain. Soldiers were freezing, starving, and exhausted beyond anything they had ever experienced. Disease spread quickly through the camp, and many did not live to see another day. It was not always the enemy that threatened them the most, but the conditions around them, the lack of resources, and the slow breaking of morale that pushed them closer to collapse. And yet, in the middle of that suffering, something changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly enough that it could almost go unnoticed. The army began to adapt. Discipline improved, training became more structured, and a new kind of strength started to form. Not the strength of confidence, but the strength of endurance, the ability to keep going even when there was no clear reason to believe things would get better. This quiet transformation became one of the most important turning points because it showed that survival was still possible, even in the worst conditions. At the same time, the struggle extended beyond the battlefield. Diplomacy became just as important as fighting, because without support from other nations, especially France, the chances of survival were even smaller. Gaining that support required patience, strategy, and the ability to convince others that this fragile experiment was worth believing in. And even that support came with uncertainty, because nothing was guaranteed. Back home, the problems continued to grow. The economy remained unstable, paper money lost its value, and trust in the system began to weaken. People questioned leadership, they questioned decisions, and they questioned whether the sacrifices being made were worth it. And those questions did not always have clear answers. After the war finally came to an end, a new challenge began, one that was just as difficult as everything that came before. The challenge of turning a fragile victory into a stable nation. There was no clear blueprint for how to do this, no perfect system to follow, and no guarantee that 13 separate colonies could successfully function as one country. Under the Articles of Confederation, the government remained weak, central authority was limited, states acted independently, decisions were slow, and coordination was difficult. The country technically existed, but it was still unstable, still uncertain, and still at risk of falling apart under pressure. It took time, debate, and constant struggle to slowly move towards something stronger, to build a system that could hold together under pressure. And even that process was filled with disagreements and challenges that tested the idea of unity again and again. And yet, despite everything, despite the fear, the division, the suffering, and the constant uncertainty, it did not collapse. Not because everything went according to plan, but because enough people refused to let it fail. They argued, they struggled, they made mistakes, but they kept moving forward, slowly building something stronger out of something incredibly fragile. When you look back at those first days, they were not clean. They were not perfectly heroic, and they were not certain. They were messy, painful, and filled with doubt. And maybe that's what makes them so real, because the beginning of America was not built on confidence. It was built on persistence, the kind of persistence that keeps going even when everything suggests that it should stop. And in the end, that persistence is what turned a fragile idea into something that would survive against all expectations.